Maps. So what are maps? Maps are the third infographic listed in the lessons that we are going through. So we've mentioned glances and graphs, and now maps. So what are maps? Maps basically offer specifically targeted information. So not everything that you ever wanted to know about, but a specific piece of information. So typically when we're talking about our information graphics maps, we want to make sure that we are only highlighting maybe 1 to 2 key cities. You might need more for reference, but remember the whole point of an infographic is to communicate a message. We want to make sure that we follow that visual inverted pyramid to make sure that we have that one clear main point, and then after that, the secondary points and maybe some additional supporting details. We might need to include what we call a pointer box, and we'll look at that in a moment. You do not need to show or state a scale or a compass indicator. And it can interfere. So if you do, make sure that you don't interfere with that main communicated message. So when we look at maps, we look at several different kinds. Number 1 being a locator, 2 an inset, a data map, schematics, and sequences. Sequences are kind of pulled apart into their own lesson because they chart an event across space and time. But let's look closer at locators, which really show where something is or will be in relation to something else. The insets, which typically the inset tags along with the locator, it identifies a point or a region iconically, typically also adding with a pointer box. The data maps report where different statistical facts or quantities occurred, and a schematic is really how do I get from A to B. Schematics really don't care at all about scale. So when we're dealing with maps, we want to make sure that we don't deceive by proportions or orientations that are unusual. So we try to remember north should be at the top. And a map that does require a scale to be understood has failed to be a graphic. Maps are best suited for expressing, of course, geographical relationships, labeling topics by place. You don't want to use a map as a graphic for listing specific details. And we also don't want to use a map if the location or path is insignificant to the communicated message. So maps answer the question where. Sometimes they answer occasionally how. They are often used as an entry point within the text. They typically 1 to 3 inches wide. Sometimes they can get much wider. We'll look at some websites utilizing these types of maps that occupy a large area of their page. The key challenge, of course, is to simplify. As is all infographics, you need to simplify that information, but you need to make sure that you still accurately and predictably depict the geography. Okay, so visual data metaphors, some drawing techniques. We want to make sure that you use a grid so that things are kept in proper proportion. The temptation to avoid is using more than 3 cities, showing everything, and a map that, again, like we said earlier, if it requires a scale to be understood, it's failed as an infographic. Here are some indicators. If your map is requiring the compass points, the distance scales, it's not an infographic, so be cautious of that.